Well, y'all, this is the Hillbilly Think Tank, and I am coming at you a little late. I apologize. There was a whole bunch of dog barking, and I saw a fire truck outside the house. I ran terrified, thought it was an emergency call that I didn't know about. Turned out it was Hardin County Fire Department raising money for St. Jude's Children's Hospital. So, of course, I had to sit there and talk to them and give them my time and promise I will make a donation as soon as this show's over. So, yeah, it's that time of year. Fire departments in Hardin County and all over are making some incredibly great drives for that wonderful institution that helps so many children out. But y'all, it is me, Spencer Keck. I am the Hillbilly Think Tank, and I am running for magistrate here in District 3 in Hardin County. Y'all, we know that life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is what makes it so great to live in this wonderful county in an amazing state that my kith and kin have been calling home for a couple centuries now, literally. So, as I think about this, that is why I decided I have had it up to here with our kakistocracy, the oligarchy, the Epstein class. You know, when my ancestors came through the Cumberland Gap with Daniel Boone, Squire Boone, and all the other long hunters, they didn't come through here in order for us to turn our freedom over to the same elites that we left over in the coastal areas of Virginia, the Carolinas, coastal Maryland. You know, no, we came out here for real freedom from those folks. Because if you didn't know, back then, there was a multi-tiered regimen to the caste system that was set up on the East Coast. You know, you had your landed gentry, which means folks who were behaving just like the aristocracy in England, and because they had land, they had all the power. And if you didn't own land, especially if you were a wandering long hunter like Boone and his ilk were, well, you were considered to be shiftless no-goods, you know, that wouldn't basically settle down, become the serf, the slave, the indentured servants of the bewigged gentry there on the coast. So, you know, they left for that. Daniel Boone actually was on the verge of being swept up into indentured servitude back where, you know, he came from on the coast. So his family would have been right there with him, put into servitude, but he was offered one last chance out of that indentured servitude if he came here to Kentucky, led folks through the Cumberland Gap, and settled an area here that one of the rich folks had just claimed and was trying to sell parcels of. So that's a little bit of our Kentucky history. When we came, we said we didn't want to be cuckolds of the rich, cuckolds of those who felt that they're entitled to our labor without giving us fair pay. So, we came through, we braved the wilderness, we made something out of ourselves. Even if it was just a hard Scrabble existence, at least we knew we were free. But, right now, we know that we've got a whole group of folks who want to take us back to that old system that we left behind when we came through the Cumberland Gap. And they would love for us to be their cuckolds again. So I'm saying, nah, we're not going to do it. So if you didn't know, currently, KET, Kentucky Educational Television, one of my favorite channels since I was a kid in the 70s, living in Appalachia with my grandparents. That's where I was introduced to Sesame Street. Everybody remember that? Also introduced to my most favorite, The Electric Company. And then something that I actually liked to watch, but it actually was more thoughtful, and that was Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Now, it was KET and PBS that gave me all these great educational opportunities. Of course, I didn't quite understand as a child that when I was watching Mr. Rogers, I was actually learning how to value a diverse culture, to look at people and figure out, were they setting up a system of equity or were they trying to build inequity? And, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, it was all about equity. Everybody was treated fairly. Everybody got to share in the same joy, the same pool. If you remember that episode where Mr. Rogers cooled off in the kiddie pool, cooled his feet off, but he invited an African American person to come and join him in the pool. That was something that really hadn't been done in the segregated parts of the U.S. where you couldn't go to a pool with a black person. But he did it right there on air for us kids to see. It was cool. So, I've been a fan of KET, especially, and PBS for years. But right now, well, by God, they're letting us down. They are acting as if they are cucks to the kakistocracy. If you didn't know it, if you want to run for office here in Kentucky, get on one of the party tickets, you've got to show KET that you have raised $150,000 in your political war chest before they will allow you on KET. Now, you could have 1,000,000 folks who have sworn that they will vote for you. But if those 1,000,000 folks don't have a total sum together of $150,000 or more to donate to you, they're not going to bother to let you get on KET. Matter of fact, they will bar you from getting on KET. Now, why do I mention this? Well, KET and PBS were one of the last bastions of the Fourth Estate. That part of our system that was supposed to protect us from overreach by either the executive branch, the legislative branch, and or the judicial branch. And if all three of those teamed up and colluded against regular folks, it's supposed to be that fourth estate of journalism that sits up, stands up, speaks up, and points out when we're being abused by a system set up by our own government. Well, we know that, The old media is now letting us down. The old form of journalism, good old TV, Walter Cronkite's and the like, they're gone. All the channels now are corporate shills. Except for a while, we could count on public broadcasting to be the one last vestige of the fourth estate, to be this fourth pillar of democracy, and to actually give it to us straight, unfettered, unbiased, often bipartisan, but definitely not partisan for just one party. And the party right now that is controlling our nation is not the Democratic Party or even the GOP. It is the guardians of the pedophile class. It's the class of billionaires that don't want democracy anymore. That's not all billionaires. It's not all millionaires, but it's a lot of them. It's an oligarchy. And they do not want us to hear from any populist groups that are not controlled by the kakistocracy. Those old landed gentry that still think they need to control all of us. Now let's go back a little bit, not as far back as when my kith and kin came to the Cumberland Gap with dear old Daniel Boone, Squire Boone, and all the other long hunters, but a little bit after that, just a little bit, when Andrew Jackson was president. Now, for all the things that, some historians revile him for, old Hickory did one thing for all of us that set our course more towards a true democracy and a republic rather than an aristocracy and a republic. And that was, he made it possible for regular men, not just men who owned land, to vote and to even hold office. This was huge because the constitutional system was set up, as we know, only for white men with land to hold office and to vote. But when along came Andrew Jackson, no, he made sure that men that were, born in America, of course, at that time, it still had to be white men, but if they were U.S. citizens, it didn't matter if they rented, if they were long hunters, as long as they could go to a registrar and register to vote, they could vote. So that gave a lot of more democratic power in our republic to the common man. But since then, of course, there's been a long struggle to get equity in voting for everyone, to get equity and representation for everyone. And right now, we're taking some serious step backs when it comes to equity and representation. It doesn't matter what your race is, if you're not going to promise fealty to the richest in the United States and to the largest PACs in the United States, that's the acronym PAC, not packs like packs of dogs, although they behave like packs of ravenous wolves, ready to eat up any of us who will stand up for democracy against the oligarchy. So, ever since Andrew Jackson started, this path of more people being allowed to vote than ever before, wasn't long after that, we had a civil war. And we made sure to free a whole population that until then had been in chattel slavery. We know that. Then came a long struggle after Reconstruction to fight off Jim Crow. That was a long, nasty fight. Is it completely over? We thought it was after the election of President Obama, but ever since Citizen United came along and it was announced that corporations are people too, well, corporations and the kakistocracy have gained more and more and more power. They've taken over all of the legacy media outlets. They, for a long time, did not get full control, though, over public broadcasting. But we know under the last Bush, they started decreasing the funds to public broadcasting. They also started putting more government tentacles into public broadcasting, making sure that it started leaning further to the right as much as they could, put pressure on them to do so. Then, of course, under Captain Bone Spur's first term and current term, the budgets for PBS and the independence of PBS are being horribly eroded, if not outright destroyed. Now, why am I telling you this? Well, because, like I said, if you're running for office here in Kentucky, the Kentucky Educational Television, PBS station, will not broadcast you. They want to give you a camera and a microphone unless you have $150 frickin' thousand dollars in your war chest, in your political war chest. You have to have all that much money in donations, or you have to be a millionaire that can afford just that much in pocket change in order to get on to KET. So we have quite a great slate of Democratic prospects running for a chance on our primary to present themselves to Kentuckians, present their cause for the common man. But only a handful of these were allowed on the KET Democratic debate. Two qualified citizens running for Senate, Logan Forsyth, who I've had on here before, and Vincent Thompson, who is running for Senate right here in Hardin County, one of our local cattlemen. He also was not allowed on there, even though Vincent Thompson has hit 100 of our counties. I say hit, I mean taken real good visits to. Listen to everyone there, tell him what they want out of their leadership. He's been able to explain his vision for Kentucky. He is constantly traveling, constantly trying to pitch his vision for a Kentucky that is united for all of us, not just them in the top. We've only got one billionaire officially in Kentucky. Now, I don't know who she is backing, but I know that we also have a lot of other millionaires who live here that, take a part in a lot of what they call, the blue-blooded Kentucky outings and victory dances and whatever they do when they back rub each other, but, look down the noses of regular Kentuckians. Now, I've got nothing wrong with Rolexes. I'm sure they are great watches, but I've never owned one. But the Rolex wearing class, they shouldn't be the only ones that get onto KET, that get to pitch a vision for not just Kentucky, but all of America on KET. Now, same thing has gone on here in our congressional district. We know that we need a strong candidate to go up against Guthrie in this next election. We know that Guthrie is a shill for the Kakistocracy. He has voted down anything to do with helping Kentuckians that need Medicare and Medicaid. He has voted along MAGA lines when it comes to hurting the medical care of those who use Medicare and Medicaid here in this state. He's dedicated to all those folks who are pension fund babies. He's not dedicated to helping out working class Kentuckians. When was the last time he had an open, in-person town hall here in Hardin County? He's been invited many times, hasn't done it, hasn't been brave enough, willing enough to come in person and show his face. Yeah, I've seen the emails where he's invited us on to what? An email chat? Yeah, no. He is not willing to put himself here in the county to talk to us in living flesh. That is not a representative democracy person. That is a kakistocracy person. More time in DC than here in Kentucky with regular Kentuckians. So all of these candidates, that have not been allowed on KET, another one of them is William Dakota Compton. And all the other Democratic candidates that are on the primary ticket for the Democrats here in this congressional district. None of them have been allowed on KET to debate Guthrie, to talk about their positions to the voters amongst each other, to debate each other on KET. How is this a public service? Because public broadcasting is supposed to be a public service. What on earth are we thinking when we allow this? Now, you probably noticed after a lot of KET shows, you'll see that some of the biggest donors are, Moscow Mitch and his wife and their family businesses. Now, yes, I appreciate the fact that they donate to KET and to PBS, but because they're part of the donor class, that means that folks like Mr. Compton, who's running for office, who's raised more money from small donors than any of his other, competitors that are on the Democratic ticket, but he has not reached $150,000 in donation. Well, KET also said he cannot be on KET. They will not give him a microphone. They will not put a camera on him on KET. This is supposed to be a public service to us, this channel. Again, they are not living up to the legacy of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. All right, so I'm going to read to you 2 emails that I sent to Mr. Gibbs of KET. He's in charge of whether these candidates on the Democratic ticket or any ticket of any party can get on to KET to present their case to the state, to the constituents. He's the one who is not allowing it. So I've sent 2 emails. First, when I found out that he was not allowing our candidates on the Democratic ticket that are trying to run against Guthrie. So here's what I said to him. I said, Mr. Gibbs, I'm a paying donor, member of KET PBS. I'm a public school teacher, educator. I'm a disabled combat veteran and retired from the military. I'm appalled that you will not allow Democratic primary candidate for U.S. House of Representatives, William Dakota Compton, to come on KET and debate GOP Rep Guthrie and present an alternate path for Kentucky and the United States of America. In an era of corporate corruption of U.S. politics, your decision not to let William on KET is an absolute travesty, requiring a very successful grassroots campaign to have the same amount of corporate grift. I said that, grift, as Guthrie before it is allowed a voice on public broadcasting as a pox on the very idea of KET being public. And I'll say here, KET should not call itself public broadcasting anymore. They should call themselves the Kakistocracry Broadcasting. That's the service they're performing. It's one for them. It's not a public broadcasting service, obviously, anymore. All right, I'll read on. It is obvious that KET is becoming another facade for the corporate domination of our once equanimous nation. William's dedication to public service as a public school teacher who is running for office should be enough of a story in itself for KET to have had him on with Representative Guthrie on the 11th of May. The fact that you chose not to let him do so tells me I should not renew my annual donation to KET, as I obviously do not make enough as a disabled combat veteran and a public school teacher for my donations to mean anything to PBS and Kentucky Educational Television. I am sure I would need to donate $100,000 to KET for my donation and for his to matter to KET. Thank you for allowing democracy to be swallowed whole by the kakistocracy in this republic. Sincerely, Spencer Keck. And as I close every email, I also have there, prayer is indeed good, but while calling on the gods, a man should himself lend a hand. That's another great aphorism of Hippocrates. All right, so then this afternoon, when I really got to thinking about how our other two candidates weren't allowed to have a debate with the other Democratic candidates because they hadn't raised $150,000. So that means that Vince Thompson from right here in Hardin County, a cattleman and the head of our conservation district, he was not allowed on there. He's already a public servant as the head of our conservation district, and yet he wasn't allowed on. He's also a public servant as a cattleman. One of our legacy farmers. Also, Logan Forsyth, the other Senate candidate that was not allowed at the Democratic debate because he had come a little short of raising the $150,000 political war chest that KET requires. I guess it's not enough that he served in the Secret Service for many years and also was a Department of Defense employee before that. But that service to the nation means nothing to KET. And the fact that these are both sons of Kentucky means nothing to KET. So when I thought about them, in addition to William, I had to write another letter to Mr. Gibbs there at KET. And it goes something like this. Good afternoon. Since I wrote you last, I dug deeper into KET's prevention of Democrat candidates from appearing on KET unless they receive $150,000 in donations or have a personally bankrolled war chest of at least that much. I see this as even clearer evidence that KET PBS is truly dedicated to ensuring only millionaires, billionaires have access to and control of our elections and our elected officials. This policy is more than lamentable. It is traitorous to my ancestors who came through the Cumberland Gap in Kentucky with Daniel Boone to escape indentured servitude and or the threat thereof from the bewigged fops of Virginia, Maryland, and the Carolinas. My ancestors came to the Kentucky mountains and valleys to escape a rigid caste system determined to prevent poor, hardworking men from rising beyond their means in a system designed to keep the unlanded men in a system that kept these unlanded men apart from and beneath the heels of the landed gentry. Ever since Andrew Jackson made it possible for men with or without land to vote and run for office, there has been a constant attempt, often successfully, to prevent the popular vote and populist democratic fronts from overwhelming the inordinate power of the wealthiest of wealthy to control all decisions made by local, state, and federal governments in our bountiful nation. Now, after a decade of a landed gentry man, many decades, I'm sorry is what I said. Now, after decades of landed gentry man from Alabama, finally retiring from being Kentucky's U.S. Senator of the gentry, for the gentry, and by the gentry, Kentucky has a chance to wrest a bit of power from the gentry and make our nation not an oligarchy and a republic, but a true representative democracy in a republic, which we have not lived up to since Franklin Delano Roosevelt passed away, and especially since January 3rd, 1999 in Kentucky, when the last FDR Democrat retired from the United States Senate. Of course, I know that Moscow Mitch and his wife donated a slew of money to KET. And just like the U.S. Congress is beholden to AIPAC money, KET is beholden to the largesse of the landed gentry for their donations. But the winds of freedom are calling. It was from KET, while still a child in Appalachia, that I first became enamored with intellectual investigations via Sesame Street, The Electric Company, and Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Because of Mr. Rogers, I began to look for and expect a world of inclusivity and equity. Your decision not to allow Vincent Thomas, William Compton, and Logan Forsyth on KET to pitch their vision for Kentucky and America's future governance is more in line with Fox News and OAN than it is with the enduring principles of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, where everyone was given a voice and allowed to share in his pool. There are only a few days left before Primary Tuesday, but I urge you to reconsider your $150,000 political war chest policy, which excludes the voices of the common man from being seen and heard in our representative democracy in a republic. Guys, I'm going to pause here and let's really think about that, all right? I am begging them, I beg this channel to allow these candidates to be able to give a voice to the common man and the common woman in our democracy and republic. All right, so I will continue now with what I wrote. Your public war chest policy excludes the voices of the common man from being seen and heard in our public political arena, and instead only provides a voice that speaks for and to the donor class. Each of these candidates has a donor base, and that base is legion. But you know as well as I do, a legion of the common masses counts as nothing to the kakistocracy and its oligarchy in a republic. I implore you to give these Kentucky men a good bit of time on KET before Tuesday. We are in an extraordinary time, akin to the days before the storming of the Bastille and the collapse of the world economy after the Hoover crushed the U.S. economy 100 years or so after Bastille. And after Hoover crushed the U.S. economy while trying to serve the gentry of the oligarchy, you should err on the right side of democracy and not oligarchy. And as I stated before, though my annual donations as a disabled United States combat veteran turned public school teacher is small compared to the Mitch McConnell family donations, I will not donate again this year if you steer the ship of KET solely for the benefit of the captains of industry. I will also do anything I can to push my letters to you, to your competitors, and the general public so that we can have a boycott of KET PBS as great as the one Disney and ABC experienced when they caved in to the whims of a capricious, thin-skinned oligarch recently. I understand that hurt their bottom line. I also witnessed KET derided and treated as a cuckold at the Fancy Farm picnic as the GOP treated KET to a laser-focused shredding live on stage. I also heard a biker ask one of your KET reporters where the Democratic candidates were and why was only one at Fancy Farm. He told your reporter that he wants to hear from both sides of the ballot before the election, but he was very upset that he could not. I hope your reporter took that news back to you. But after being burnt at the stake by the GOP at the picnic, maybe your reporters were speechless. Don't leave the representatives of the masses speechless when all you have to do is give them one primetime camera and microphone. But you choose not to due to the fact that their fiduciary size is not in accordance with your kakistocracy. Restless masses that know they are abandoned by the bulwark of democracy become like the masses at the Bastille in France. You know you have an opportunity to facilitate a movement that does not require a storming of the Bastille and its aftermath, but instead you can facilitate the well-lubricated wheels of our democracy in a republic so that it carries water for all of us, not just the rest of them at the top. Don't be just another Kentucky Entertainment Network. Remember your Kentucky roots of freedom and equity. History is watching. Sincerely, Spencer Keck, son of the Cumberland Gap Originals. So, you all, this is, what I have to say. So, let's see what comments we got. See, I got some other great folks on here. We got Jonathan on here. Be the type of neighbor Mr. Rogers would be proud of. Thank you so much, Jonathan. I couldn't have said it better myself. I see we got Mike of 3078 on here. Good evening, says Mike. Good evening there, Mike. All right. Also got old guy from North Carolina saying debates on your local public broadcasting service, PBS, only allowed well-funded candidates to show? Shameful. Absolutely. Absolutely shameful. And, right back to what Jonathan said, they need to be the type of neighbors Mr. Rogers would be proud of. And Jonathan is fighting the good political fight, the civic fight there in Memphis. More power to you, Jonathan. This is what we need more of because we know the Kakistocracy is trying to shut down the voice of the common folk. And they're really going hardcore at it in Tennessee and Memphis. All right, old guy in North Carolina. Everyone has fulfilled requirements to run, should be in the debate. And that's right. If you've got a pulse and you fulfill the requirements to run and you are on the ticket, then as long as you aren't a crazy lunatic, you should be on public broadcasting service. All right. Hey, we got another one of my favorite viewers, listeners, the ghost of John Brown. Of course, John Brown is one of my heroes of the abolitionists. Says John Brown. First comment removed. Let's try it this way. There are some great episodes in the series Love, Death, and Robots that the 1% should watch. Well, I guess I'm going to have to check that series out. Absolutely. So, lovers of democracy, and for any of you who are like me, a son of the Cumberland Gap Originals, I'm calling on y'all. Remember our history. Remember our heritage. It is a heritage that came here through the Cumberland Gap to escape the Kakistocracy, those bewigged folks on the coast who wanted to set up the same type of gentry as there had been in England and in other places in Europe. Well, my ancestors were having none of it. Many of my ancestors, they were long hunters, just like Daniel Boone and Squire Boone. And this here is what they used as a long hunter and as a defender of this democracy and a republic. So we must remember our heritage. We must remember that it's up to us to be the voices of the common man. And we have got to fight for those voices to be listened to once again in this democracy, or it is no more a democracy. It's simply an oligarchy in a republic. Now, that's what Rome became. They set up a great example of a constitutional style, or at least a republic style of representative democracy. But then the oligarchy seized control. The Caesar seized control, and the common folk had no more plebeian representation. So we've got to get back to common folks having full representation in our democracy in a republic. This democracy in a republic has to be for everyone, not just for a few. So we have moved past a point where it's Democrats versus Republicans. It's the folks who are not allowed representation against the oligarchs at the top who don't want democracy anymore. who think that because they have Silicon power money to throw around like candy to the masses, that's the reason they should control all of us. I refuse it. I hope you do too. Kentucky, Hardin County, we know that to keep this democracy in a republic, we must live up to our Kentucky motto. United we stand, divided we fall. And the only way we're going to keep from being divided is if we have truly public television, truly public radio, truly public broadcasting that allows a public voice to be heard in the public. If you're on the ballot, you should be in the debates that KET and PBS hold. It's that simple. If you qualified and you went through the wickets to be on the ballot, you should be in the debates. Anything else is just kakistocracy in disguise. So, I encourage everyone, please write PBS, call PBS. And if they won't give in to our demands, we need to start a boycott of a once great public institution, a great once public service institution. But do not let them divide us, because we are our brother's keeper. We are our sister's keeper. And this means we love our neighbors as ourselves. Remember, everyone deployed. I hope that you enjoyed this beautiful day as much as I did, as much as the puppies did, as they went frolicking and frisking about today here in wonderful Hardin County. Now, y'all, I've got someone else who has sent me a story. That's Jonathan, that he wants me to report on and talk about tomorrow. I'm going to do some research on it. And if you will tune in tomorrow, we're going to talk about someone that Jonathan is convinced needs a stay of execution. So that will be on our broadcast tomorrow. Until then, keep your powder dry and stay frosty, Kentucky.
Because when the fast force grows on farms across